In today's video, I'm going to share with you several surprising statistics that will doubtless make you rethink retiring after the age of 60. Today we're going to look at what the data actually shows, and it may very well show how you're actually much richer than you think. My name's John Norberg. I'm a certified financial planner, and I run Norberg Wealth Management, where I work with individuals and couples who are approaching retirement or navigating its early years. The four statistics that we're going to examine today are ones which I return to regularly with clients. And it's not to alarm them, but because it gives clarity about where things actually stand. It is almost always more useful than anxiety to think about where we imagine them to stand to know what that reality actually looks like. With that introduction, I'd like to welcome you to this latest edition of the Financial Prof series. Alright, so number one, the number behind the number. Here's the first statistic. The median retirement savings for Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 is $185,000. And that figure comes from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, which is about as authoritative a source as exists on this question. And when most people hear it, the reaction is one of two things, right? Either relief because they have more than that, or alarm because they have less. Both reactions, I would argue, are missing the point. So let me explain what I mean by this. I want to introduce a distinction that I think is one of the most practically useful things a pre-retiree can understand. The difference between the mean and the median when it comes to statistics. The median is the number right in the middle. Half of people have more and half of people have less. The mean is what we typically call the average. You add everything up and divide by the number of people in a perfectly equal distribution. They'd be nearly identical, but retirement savings are not equally distributed. A small number of extraordinarily wealthy households hold an enormous share of total retirement assets. And when you include them in the calculation, the mean gets pulled up dramatically to a figure that looks much more comfortable than the actual experience of most people. The median, by contrast, tells you what a typical person actually has. And that's the number worth paying attention to. But here's the nuance I want you to hold on to. $185,000 can, in some cases, seem like an alarming number in isolation, but it tells you very little about any individual's actual retirement readiness without context. I had a client, we'll call him David, who came to me convinced that he was dangerously behind. He'd read an article about retirement saving averages, compared himself to this mean, and then felt he'd failed. But the really interesting thing about David was when we actually sat down and mapped out his full picture, his Social Security benefit, a pension from a previous employer, a paid-off home, and actually fairly modest but consistent spending habits. His situation looked considerably more secure than the headline number had suggested. The number is a starting point, not a verdict. What matters is whether you have a plan to turn whatever you've saved into sustainable income for the duration of your retirement. So maybe you're behind, but maybe you're not, and maybe $185,000 is more than you'd ever need, and maybe it's far less. You'll never know unless you sit down and plot that out. And that brings us to the second statistic. Because the duration question is where most people's assumptions either go quietly wrong or completely off the tracks. So stick with me, because this might surprise you. According to the Social Security Administration actuarial data on the question of how long is retirement really, right? A 65-year-old woman today has approximately a 65% probability of living to age 85. A 65-year-old man has roughly 55% probability of doing the same. So think about what that means. For most people watching this video, a 20-year retirement is not an optimistic outlier. It's close to the baseline assumption for financial planning. And for those hoping to retire before that point, we're often talking about 25 or even 30 years or more. And if you have longevity in your family, perhaps even much more. Now, 30 years may sound like a long time to make money last, and it is. But the more important insight is that a 30-year retirement is not simply 20 years that keep going a bit longer. It's a categorically different planning problem. And the reason comes down to what's called sequence of returns risk, which is, in my view, one of the most underappreciated concepts in all of retirement. Here's the core idea. When you're accumulating savings during your working years, the order in which your investment returns arrive doesn't matter very much. If you earn 20% one year and lose 10% the next, or lose 10% one year and earn 20% the next, your ending balance is probably roughly the same either way once you get to that retirement date, right? But once you retire and begin drawing from your portfolio, the order matters enormously. A significant market decline in the first few years of retirement, while you're making regular withdrawals, can permanently impair a portfolio in a way that a decline 10 years in simply can't, right? The reason is that when markets fall and you're selling assets to fund your spending, you're locking in losses at some of the worst possible times. The portfolio has less capital remaining to participate in any eventual recovery. And this is why the old rule of thumb, which is save enough and then withdraw 4% a year and you'll be fine, is a simplification that can be misleading. The 4% guideline was developed with specific historical return sequences in mind, and it doesn't account for the particular sequence you happen to retire into. A retiree who stepped into a severe market downturn their first year would have had a much different outcome than the one who retired into a bull market, even with identical savings and withdrawal rates, right? The practical implication is this. A well designed retirement income plan doesn't just ask how much you have, it asks how your withdrawals are structured relative to your portfolio's volatility. Maintaining a reserve of liquid assets to fund 1 to 2 years of spending means you never have to sell equities at depressed prices to meet your needs. Or at least it's very unlikely, right? You give the portfolio time to recover. That's not a minor adjustment to a retirement plan, it's a fundamental reorientation of how you think about risk. Now, everything I've just described, the longevity, the sequence risk, the withdrawal structure, all of it gets significantly more complicated by something most people haven't fully reckoned with yet. And it involves a silent partner inside your retirement account that has a substantial claim on a portion of your retirement savings, which is what I'm about to get into. What is that third statistic? It's that silent partner in your retirement account. Yes, I'm talking about the good old IRS. According to the Investment Company Institute, total US retirement assets reached $49.1 trillion at the end of 2025. IRAs alone account for 19.2 trillion of that, and traditional 401ks hold another 10.1 trillion. Now together that's the vast majority of American retirement savings, and the overwhelming majority sits in pre-tax accounts, meaning every dollar of it has never been taxed. Here's the way I find it most useful to think about this. A traditional IRA is not entirely your money. You are functionally a co-owner of that fund with the IRS. You contributed the money, you bore the risk, you watched it grow, but the IRS has a silent claim on a portion of every dollar you withdraw, and the size of that claim is determined by whatever tax rates are in effect at the time you take the money out. You agreed to this arrangement the day you made your first contribution, and it's a reasonable deal. The tax deferral has real value, but the co-ownership is real too, and a surprising number of people don't fully internalize it until they start taking those distributions. The moment that partnership becomes impossible to ignore is when required minimum distributions begin. For most people, this is in their who are in sorry, for most people who are in their mid to late 50s and 60s today, RMDs start at age 73. Though if you were born after 1960, that age rises to 75 under current law. At that point, regardless of whether you need the money or not, you're required to withdraw a calculated minimum each year based on your account balance and IRS expectancy tables. Those withdrawals are taxed as ordinary income, and for someone who has accumulated a meaningful pre-tax balance, that RMD can be crushing, potentially pushing them into a much higher bracket than they ever occupied during their working or early retirement years, triggering higher Medicare premiums through IRMA surcharges, that is, income related monthly adjustment amounts, and increasing the taxable portion of their Social Security benefit. Three tax consequences, all from a single forced distribution that they didn't plan for. Now, the window for addressing this, and there is a very clear window, is usually the period between retirement and the onset of RMDs, required minimum distributions. For many people, those years represent the lowest income period of their adult life. They're no longer earning a salary, Social Security may not have yet begun or is taken at a reduced rate, their taxable income is at a relative low, and this is precisely when a Roth conversion strategy can make the most sense. Converting pre-tax dollars to Roth during this window means paying tax now at what is likely a lower rate in exchange for tax-free income later. Income that doesn't trigger IRMA, it doesn't inflate your Social Security tax exposure, and it doesn't generate future RMDs. It is one of the most valuable planning moves available to pre-retirees and early retirees, and it's one that becomes significantly less useful once your RMDs do begin and income rises accordingly. The question is never whether to consider Roth conversions. The question is, having considered them, how much to convert in each year without needlessly crossing into a higher bracket than is necessary. That is a calculation which I believe is fully worth doing carefully, and doing soon. And here's what I find striking about everything we've covered so far. Each of these first three stats points towards a version of retirement that's more complex, longer, and more tax exposed than most people assume. And the earlier you retire, the more important it is to get this right. And yet the fourth statistic suggests that when people actually arrive at retirement, the most common failure isn't running out of money. It's something that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most important thing in the entirety of this video. So what is that risk that nobody talks about? Well, research from the Employee Benefit Research Institute and from Morningstar consistently shows that retirees with adequate savings, people who by any means have generally what is considered to be enough, tend to significantly underspend. In EBRI's research, 38% of retirees hold back spending, specifically because they're saving for unforeseen costs later. Another 27% cite a simple fear of running out of money. And Morningstar found that 98%, almost all retirees, had no intention of changing their withdrawal approach, most defaulting to RMDs or intuitive spending rather than engaging with a deliberate income strategy. And the result is that many retirees die with considerably more than they needed, having led a more constrained life than their savings would have permitted, whether that means they worked too long, or spent too little, or possibly even both. Now, before I say more, I do want to acknowledge that this is not a universal experience. For lower income retirees, or those who retired earlier than planned due to health or job loss or what have you, the challenge unfortunately runs the other direction. But for the audience this channel is primarily built for, which is those who have saved diligently over a career and are arriving at retirement with real assets, underspending is a genuine and underappreciated risk, and it deserves to be named as such. As the wise G.K. Chesterton once observed, it isn't that people can't see the solution, it's that they can't see the problem. In this case, the problem people can see, the fear of running out, is real and worth taking seriously. But the problem that they can't see is equally real. A retirement plan that succeeds financially but fails on a human level because the confidence to actually spend was never built into the architecture of the plan, and they end up retiring and eventually dying like a great dragon atop its hoard. Confidence doesn't come from watching your balance, it comes from understanding your system, knowing that your income is covered, your downside is protected, and what remains is genuinely available for the life you worked 3, 4 decades or more to reach. So as you listen to these statistics, my hope is that they've given you something thought-provoking on which to ruminate in the coming days and weeks, as you consider what true human flourishing means for you in your retirement chapters. The gap between mean and median savings tells you that your benchmark matters, and that a number without context is just a number, whether yours is higher, lower, or in between. The longevity data tells you that retirement is almost certainly longer than your planning assumes, and that the sequence in which your returns arrive can matter as much as the returns themselves. The tax time bomb tells you that the money in your pre-tax accounts is co-owned, and the window for addressing that is likely open right now, and it won't stay open indefinitely. And the spending paradox tells you that the point of planning is not only to protect against the worst, it is to give you the confidence to live well in the most likely scenario. So if any of what we've covered today has made you want to look more closely at your own numbers, that's exactly the conversation that I would welcome with you. There's a link in the description below to book a consultation directly with me, and I would be glad to help you move from uncertainty to clarity on any of these questions. Thank you for watching. In the meantime, I'll see you out there.